Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes, and we are now 5 days out from the midterms, and every single day it feels like we're all confronted with some new ugliness from the president and the Republican Party. But Democrats believe they have an antidote. The Republican strategy of fear includes Donald Trump's latest video on Twitter, a naked and really disgusting appeal to xenophobia and racism. And that's how Republicans are quite explicitly trying to motivate their base to vote. They've been really clear about what they're doing: fear, animus, suspicion. The Democratic solution, when at least it's articulated in its most direct and inspirational terms, is simple: a broad, inclusive vision of voting and democracy. Hope in the power of every individual voter. And there's reason tonight to think it may be working. The sense of hope is placing states like Texas in play, where Democrat Beto O'Rourke is trying to unseat Senator Ted Cruz. States like Florida, where Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum, who will be with us later tonight, is in a very tight gubernatorial race. But perhaps nowhere is that strategy of inclusiveness and hope more significant than Georgia. And that is where Democrat Stacey Abrams could become the nation's first black female governor ever. Abrams is running against Brian Kemp, the Georgia Secretary of State, who has actively been trying to suppress the vote for years, in fact, including this year when he put 53,000 voter registrations on hold, 70% of them from black voters, and who just this last week pulled out of a debate with Abrams so he could instead stump with the president. The nonpartisan Cook Political Report rates the race a toss-up, and the polls have shown the two in a statistical dead heat. But today Abrams brought in a special guest to help her campaign: Oprah Winfrey. And Winfrey hammered home that message of hope, of inclusiveness, of the very values of democracy that Abrams and other Democrats are hoping will win at the polls in just 5 days.
I'm here today because of Stacey Abrams. And I'm here today because of the men and because of the women who were lynched, who were humiliated, who were discriminated against, who were suppressed, who were repressed and oppressed for the right, for the equality at the polls. And I want you to know that their blood has seeped into my DNA, and I refuse to let their sacrifices be in vain. I refuse. Don't let nobody turn you around. You can't let their sacrifices be in vain. I didn't take voting seriously until around my mid-20s. And around my mid-20s, I had the privilege of hearing Reverend Otis Moss Jr., who's a preacher. Y'all know him? Preacher in Cleveland, Ohio. And I heard him tell the story of his father, of Otis Moss Sr., who right here in Georgia's Troup County got up in the morning and put on his only suit and his best tie. And he walked 6 miles to the voting poll location he was told to go to in LaGrange. And when he got there, after walking 6 miles in his good suit and tie, they said, "Boy, you at the wrong place. You're at the wrong place. You need to go over to Mountville." So he walked another 6 miles to Mountville. And when he got there, they said, "Boy, you at the wrong place. You need to go to the Rosemont School." And I picture him walking from dawn to dusk in his suit, his feet tired, getting to the Rosemont School, and they say, "Boy, you too late. The polls are closed." And he never had a chance to vote. By the time the next election came around, he had died. So when I go to the polls and I cast my ballot, I cast it for a man I never knew. I cast it for Otis Moss Sr., who walked 18 miles one day just for the chance to vote. And when I go into the polls, I cast the vote for my grandmother, Hattie Mae Lee, who died in 1963 before the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and never had a chance to vote. I vote for her. And when I stand in the polls, I do what Maya Angelou says, I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. For all those who paved the way that we might have the right to vote. And for anybody here who has an ancestor who didn't have the right to vote, and you are choosing not to vote wherever you are in this state, in this country, you are dishonoring your family. You are disrespecting and disregarding their legacy, their suffering and their dreams when you don't vote. So honor your legacy. Honor your legacy. Honor your right to citizenship in this, which is the greatest country in the world. The greatest country in the world. And the right to vote is like the crown we all get to wear.
Here to talk about the path forward for Democrats in these last days before the election, Democratic strategist Tara Dowdell and MSNBC political analyst and politics editor of The Root, Jason Johnson. That was really something today, Tara.
Right. No, it was incredible. And I think what you're seeing is you're seeing a new movement of black women's empowerment. And it's a movement that is no longer demanding a seat at the table. It is a movement that is building its own table. And so I think that is what you're seeing around the country, not just in Georgia, but I think Stacey Abrams and her campaign is most reflective of that trend.
Yeah, Jason, you know, one of the reasons that this race is so fascinating, not least because she will be the first black woman governor in the history of the nation, that it's happening in the South, that it's a state that Democrats have had a very hard time statewide in. The gubernatorial candidate lost pretty badly 4 years ago. Is that Stacey Abrams' theory of the case is the theory that she's implementing she had before she ever ran, which is basically you mobilize your coalition, you get voters to the polls, you register people, and you can win in a state like Georgia, and she is now testing that, as many Democrats are across the nation.
Yeah, I think we gotta go micro here. I know where that place was. I know that part of Marietta. I used to live up there. You got Oprah to, on her own, come down and campaign on Stacey's behalf. Oprah left whatever magical palace she lives in to come down and campaign. This is someone who, for all of her power and all of her influence, has actually not campaigned for a candidate almost since Obama. That's indicative of the fact that if you work hard and you put a functional campaign together, you will attract people who actually know what they're doing and will put their integrity, their political capital, and their social capital on the line. It is an amazing move on the Abrams campaign's behalf to not only get Oprah down there, but to not just make it about, hey, we've got a celebrity. If you watch the whole tape, she spent a lot of time talking about policy, talking about health care, because that's eventually what's going to drive people over the line.
You know, I was when listening to the Oprah rhetoric, I was reminded in some ways of 2008 and Barack Obama. Right. And what it is, it was a reminder of, look, if you're the party in America or the coalition in America, which I think is more accurate, that's trying to put together the multiracial coalition, right, the more diverse coalition, the folks that represent people from a lot of different walks of life, then you got to kind of, the rhetoric has to be aspirational and reaching out, because getting into a sort of, fear place isn't the place that you motivate that coalition to stick together.
Right, exactly. And so not only is Stacey Abrams doing it from a policy perspective, as Jason mentioned, but her campaign itself reflects her very values. Her campaign has a significant number of African Americans, not just working on the campaign, but in positions of power on the campaign. She has Asians working on her campaign in significant numbers, bigger numbers than most Democratic candidates or any candidates. She has Hispanics. She has white people working on her campaign. So she has built that coalition on her campaign, and that is not lost on voters.
And that's one of the things we're seeing in this election, as much as anything, Jason, is the representational gap between who votes for the Democratic Party and who they have running shrinking. What is happening this year has never happened before in terms of the range of candidates that are going to be on the ballot.
Right, because eventually your candidate should start to look like the people who are voting for you, right? That's what the Democratic Party has finally figured out. And I think also this, and we see this with Gillum, we saw this with Justin Fairfax in Virginia, and again, you see it with Stacey Abrams. Marietta is not the black part of town. My favorite Indian restaurant is right down the street over there. I used to live over there. Like, that is a very diverse part of Atlanta. What they're demonstrating is that, look, when you talk policy, when you talk aspiration, when you say, hey, you shouldn't vote for the guy who's trying to steal your vote vote who takes pictures with white nationalists is hanging out with Trump on Sunday. When you make a campaign about what benefits everybody, that's actually to the benefit of not only who's going to vote, but even how you end up being covered. And that's going to be the difference. This is going to be a very, very close election. It's going to come right down to the line. I suspect I'm going to be there all night following this. But the method and the process that the Abrams campaign has put forward is the only way that Democrats will be able to be competitive in 2020, let alone in a lot of other states across the South in the coming years.
Yeah, what do you see now happening in the conversations and the arguments Democrats are making that are starting to shape the way that they're going to message in the sort of Trump era?
I think you're seeing Democrats be more forceful, being bolder, be more unapologetic in terms of progressivism. And so I think that's what you're seeing. And that's what you see in the Stacey Abrams campaign. Also, one thing that doesn't get talked about a lot is how early she started organizing and how she targeted voters who would normally support Democrats but sat out in 2016. She has put together, before her campaign, she has a training institute for, to help women run for office. She has a lot of infrastructure. She registered, I believe, through one of her other organizations, 200,000 voters or something along those lines. So she has been on the ground organizing in these communities. And that's the other important element of this, is that you can't go to people right before the election and ask for their votes.
And that's the question we're seeing right now. I mean, I just saw Nate Silver saying that they were predicting, his model's predicting about 101 million House votes this year compared to 78 million in 2014. So that would be an enormous, enormous leap. Every place that we're seeing early voting numbers, we're seeing huge jumps. That doesn't say who's going to win. It just says that people are enthusiastic and people are tuned in. But it does seem that, like, you can feel right now that people are paying attention. You can just feel it.
They're paying attention, Chris, and what they're also doing is, look, a lot of times in political science, when you're looking at early voting, you always worry, okay, is the early vote cannibalizing same-day voting? That's not what's happening in Georgia. In red counties, you're seeing the early votes have exceeded the total number of votes in 2014. In some blue counties, you're seeing it hit 60, 70-something%, and 500,000 new voters have already voted early voting in Georgia. So if those numbers continue,
wait, is that true?
Yes, they already. They had 500,000.
Wow.
Yes, 500,000. I actually was just looking at those numbers online. It's insane to see that many new people voting and that many people voting early. So when you have those kinds of numbers, that suggests a level of enthusiasm. Now, all those people aren't Democrats. You've got Republicans who care too, but I am always happy if we can see a country where people are actually engaged on a regular basis as opposed to skipping.
It's funny you say that, because I was thinking about this today, and I was actually looking at early voting from Nevada. And in Nevada, you're seeing a lot of early voting, and particularly in huge huge Republican margins being run up in rural counties in Nevada. And my thought was, well, you know, I don't know what this means for the outcome, but it also is just in a general democratic sense, like, higher turnout elections are better.
Right.
Like, that is part of the problem with the sort of whole setup we have of midterms. When so much is determined in these years, there's such a drop-off that higher levels of participation in midterms are just going to produce a better democratic result.
I was in Taiwan when they elected their first woman president. I was there on election night, and they had an 80% voter turnout. 80% voter turnout. I mean, and they don't even have the lengthy elections that we have in this country. So participation is better, and they also have a lot of great progressive policies in that country as well, universal health care, a number of things. So I do think that it's better, but I want to bring up something that I know we're talking about it, but we have to keep talking about it. Democrats need to run up the numbers as much as possible to compensate for this massive voter suppression that's happening across this country on multiple levels. Polling places being closed, people being removed from the voter rolls. Georgia is essentially ground zero for what this is what's happening in this country. So I think that's something else that we have to continue to remind people of and to be cognizant of, because it's an issue that even if you have that kind of turnout, how many people are being denied?
Yeah, and North Dakota has been another ground zero.
Another ground zero,
Rachel Maddow has been covering that really well. There's some action on that today. Tara Dowdell and Jason Johnson, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks.
Thank you.